Since the dawn of time, gamers have been in an eternal struggle. I want a healer, but I don't want to play one. This video is for you brave few who play a cleric, though they are dog water doo-doo. But in all seriousness, cleric is a decent class in Dark and Darker. It has its merits, and it's a necessary part of any good team composition, but can also be played solo. So the back half of this video will be for group clerics, but the front half will be for solo clerics. So for the one dude who's playing solo cleric and is watching this video, I'm looking at you, Nathan. This front half of the video will be for you, outlining a build that can function in both small PvP and also kill mobs and loot quickly. The back half of this video then will be for you group clerics. You know, the ones who are struggling to properly heal your barbarian who thinks that the Thor movies were a documentary. This solo cleric build is going to excel particularly at PvE, as the cleric does in general, but it is a sort of well-rounded build, as well-rounded as I could make it, to deal with PvE mobs effectively, but also to handle some PvP. Now, I won't lie to you, playing solo cleric is not the best class if you're looking for PvP, especially not if you're outnumbered. Now, the cleric does have some good tools in its belt to deal with a 1v1 PvP situation. In fact, I wouldn't mind taking a cleric in a 1v1 PvP situation. But if you are finding yourself in lots of group PvP, I would recommend running away. Clerics are not great at group PvP when they're alone, so keep that in mind. Starting off with the perks. So the first perk I would recommend taking as soon as possible is Undead Slaying. This perk is going to allow you to do 20% more damage to PvE mobs, and that's just useful. It's good to be able to clear mobs quickly, especially when the zone's coming in. You want to be able to kill quick and loot fast. It'll work on pretty much every mob. They're all undead, so I would recommend taking an Undead Slaying right away. The next perk I would take is Blunt Weapon Mastery. Blunt Weapon Mastery will give you 5% more damage with your mace or any other blunt weapon, which is all the cleric uses. So that's just a free damage buff against both PvE and PvP enemies. Now for perk 3, I will be recommending Brewmaster. Now this is a tricky one because with the Brewmaster perk, you won't get any use out of it unless you're bringing with you or finding alcohol, ale, to drink in the middle of combat or before combat. This perk is up to you. Brewmaster gives you really good benefits, being that if you drink ale, you get a big bonus to your strength for a while, and that will help you do more weapon damage. And with Brewmaster, you negate the blurriness and drunkenness effects from the ale. However, if you are not keen on taking with you ale or relying on ale to use this perk, then I would swap this out for Advanced Healer to give you 5 more healing on all of your heals, which would be nice for self-heals. And for perk 4, I would take Perseverance. You could also take Perseverance as perk 3 if you weren't keen on Brewmaster, but Perseverance will reduce all incoming damage by 3, so this essentially just makes you harder to kill, which is better. Now moving on to skills, the skill we'll be taking is Judgment, as well as Spell Memory, of course. The reason we're taking Judgment is because Judgment is just a great skill for both PvP and PvE. Judgment allows you to deal 30 magic damage to a target, as well as slow them down by 20% for a little bit. And while it does have a short range of 4.5 meters, it's arguably the best skill for cleric. It works great on PvE mobs, it works great on PvP players, especially in 1v1s. It's great to just get that extra damage in right away at the beginning of a fight. And it's a good skill, so take that one and then take Spell Memory. So moving on to the spells. Now for these spells, I will be selecting them based on the default stats for cleric. So if you were to increase your knowledge, you could take more spells possibly, but I will be doing the spell selection for both the solo and group build at base knowledge. So going down the list, the first spell that I would take is Lesser Heal. Lesser Heal is a healing spell that will allow you to heal yourself. as opposed to Holy Light, which will not heal you if you cast it on nothing. Lesser Heal will heal yourself if you don't cast it on anybody. So I would take that as a way to keep your health up, especially considering that health is hard to come by in this game. And the second spell I would take is Protection. So Protection will give you a small window where you have the ability to negate damage. So this is going to be really nice, especially if you know you're about to go into a fight. If you can hear footsteps around the corner, you hear someone opening a door, something like that, I would just, as you're about to get into the engagement, cast Protection on yourself. It's just free damage negation. Moving on from there, I would take Holy Light. So Holy Light is a healing spell and is very good in group play, but it will not heal yourself. However, we're still taking it because it does do quite a bit of damage to PvE mobs. So you can take Holy Light and you'll get 4 casts of it, and you can use it on PvE mobs, and it deals quite a bit of damage. And then the last spell that you can take without running out of your memory here is Divine Strike. Now, you could substitute Divine Strike with Bless, but I think Divine Strike is the way to go. Bless is more of a spell for group play, and Divine Strike works better for solo play. Now let's talk about stats. So normally, as a caster in Dark and Darker, you would want to increase your knowledge. However, as a solo cleric, you don't really need more knowledge to afford the spells that we want to take. Now, knowledge does have other benefits, but I would steer clear of trying to increase knowledge by spending money on items and things that would up that stat, as you really don't need to improve it. The stats we should really be looking at here for a solo cleric are your will and your strength. Will is going to increase the power of your spells, and strength is going to increase the power of your attacks. So when you're looking at armor possibly to buy or to trade for, I would be looking for strength and will boosting things. And lastly, let's move on to some utility items. So like I mentioned before, Brewmaster is part of the build. If you want to take that, you can. And if that is the case, you're going to want to buy ale. Now, ale is relatively inexpensive, so it's easy to buy, easy to stock up in your stash and just bring a stack of 3 with you every time you go in. It's quick to drink. If you hear combat about to pop off, you just drink an ale, cast Protection, and roll in. Also keep in mind, ale can be used to clear PvE mobs. I know sometimes it can be a little difficult to remember that you should be using your utility items to clear PvE mobs, not just PvP players. But clearing mobs is something you need to do quickly because the zone does move in and looting takes a long time. Especially as a cleric, it's not going to be quick to open things. You have a slow interact speed. So I would recommend doing anything you can to clear mobs and areas as quickly as possible and get moving. You don't want to get caught out back against the zone with 3 PvP players ahead of you guarding you. Now, some of the other utility items you could take are a bit more obvious. Potions, campfires, of course, as a spellcaster or as any class, campfires are just a useful item to have. Now, when we're talking strategy for the solo cleric of trying to make your way through the dungeon, I would recommend moving as quickly as possible. Your interact speed as a cleric is relatively slow compared to other classes, so moving quickly through the dungeon and getting more towards the center of the zone and then looting might be in your interest. As far as PvP goes, I wouldn't seek it out as a solo cleric or a solo player in general, as the chances of you running into another solo player are going to be low. However, clerics do excel in 1v1 combat, I feel. So if you do see a solo player and you know he's alone, it might be a good idea to engage him. And as with any melee class in this game, I would recommend if you're being assaulted by a group of players to choke point them at a door, bring them into a fatal funnel. Doors are your friend as a melee player because only one player can pass through a door at a time and they can body block their teammates. So I would recommend using doors to your advantage. And remember as a solo player to always cast Protection on yourself. Protection is a huge spell that is very, very, very good for negating damage and winning those 1v1s. Another thing to touch on as far as strategy for the solo cleric is your judgment ability. I would recommend using your judgment ability at the beginning of every fight. Your judgment ability has a relatively short cooldown, And there is the possibility, especially in PvP fights, that if you use it at the beginning, you could get it before the end of the fight again, depending on how passive your enemies are playing or you are playing. Also, Judgment has a 4.5 meter range, which is very short, and there is a chance that when you go to use it, you'll get hit while trying to use it. However, at the beginning of fights, you should have protection up, so using Judgment at the beginning of the fight is not only beneficial for the fact that you might get it again, but also for the fact that you'll probably be able to negate a hit if you take one while casting it. So keep that in mind when you're trying to time your Judgment ability. Alright, let's transition now to talking about the group cleric. So your job as a group cleric is going to differ greatly from a solo cleric. As a group cleric, your main role is to heal and protect your allies, but also to deal with PvE mobs and PvP players. However, you should be doing quite a bit of casting, and you should probably never be extracting or leaving dungeons without having used up most of your spells. Now, depending on the group composition that you have and the size of your group, whether you're playing with 1 or 2 other players, will affect your strategy for spellcasting. But in general, you should be putting protection on whoever your strongest melee character is once you're entering a PvP fight. However, let's start getting into the build itself. So starting off with the perks, perk 1, we're going to want to take Kindness. Now, we did not take Kindness on our solo cleric, however in a group setting we will want Kindness. This perk is going to give us some health back every time we heal our allies. And this is huge, because we're doing a lot of ally healing. So, especially if we have a melee character like a barbarian or a fighter that's up front, they're going to be taking a lot of hits, and so we're going to want to be able to heal them, and this is just going to make it so that less spells have to be spent on ourselves and more can be spent on our allies. And in the second perk slot, we're going to put Advanced Healer, which is going to give us extra healing every time we cast a heal spell, which is just great because it feeds back into our whole kindness situation of being able to take a percentage of our healing and give it back to ourselves. Now in perk 3, I have Undead Slaying. Undead Slaying again gives us a 20% boost to our damage against PvE mobs, which is just great because we can kill mobs quicker. However, I also have as an option to take in this perk 3 slot, Requiem. Now, Requiem affects the resurrection spell and causes people you resurrect to come back with 25% of their health rather than just a tiny sliver. And so if you are taking the resurrection spell, I would take Requiem here. However, we will discuss that once we get closer to the spells. And in perk 4, we have Blunt Weapon Mastery or Brewmaster. So again, if you're not keen on the Brewmaster, taking ale with you, drinking that before fights, then take Blunt Weapon Mastery here. Now our skills are going to remain the same, Judgment and Spell Memory. This does not change. Judgment is the best all-around skill for clerics. And then of course we want to be able to cast spells. Speaking of spells, for the group cleric, now this is a bit tricky because there is a spell called Resurrection, which allows you to resurrect an ally. When you do this, they'll have all of their gear. They will be at low health. If you take Requiem as a perk, they will be at 25% health. Otherwise, they will be with just a tiny sliver of health. However, they will come back where they were standing, where they died, with all of their gear on them. So, Resurrection is a good spell. However, Resurrection does cost 9 of your 12 base memory slots. And that is a lot. That is a lot of memory gone in one spell. Now, as a group cleric build, I would suggest, if you can, speccing into knowledge with gear. That way you can increase your memory slots. If you're able to increase your memory slots, I would take Resurrection. However, at base 12 memory slots, I would not take Resurrection. I would simply just plan on being able to bring a teammate's soul to a resurrection station, or just taking their gear and giving it to them later. So with that being said, I'm going to list these spells, and these spells will be for the player who is not taking the resurrection spell. I would recommend taking Protection as your first spell. Next, Holy Light. Now, Holy Light as a solo cleric was only doing us PvE damage. However, here, Holy Light is your main heal. Holy Light is the best way to heal your allies. It is a big heal, it gives them a lot of health, and it'll return you quite a bit of health too because of your kindness. So be sparing with Holy Light. And the next spell we'll be taking is Lesser Heal. So use Lesser Heal on your allies when they're, close to medium health and just need a bit of a top off. Perhaps they can use Lesser Heal with a potion or with a bandage to kind of top them off. And save Holy Light for when they're really low, especially mid-combat heals, because you will be able to try and heal mid-combat. Fights are slow and darker, and Holy Light is a big heal, and if you can time it correctly on one of your melee characters mid-fight, you could possibly flip the advantage directly onto his opponent, as his opponent sits at low health from their duel, and he all of a sudden gains a big portion of his health back middle of the fight. And the last spell that I would take here is either Bless or Divine Strike. Now, again, I said the same thing with Solo Cleric. You could take Bless or Divine Strike. Bless is good if you're going to be casting it on allies, especially if you have a Barbarian or a Fighter or a Rogue who are going into PvP fights. However, Divine Strike is good for killing PvE mobs. You just have it ready and then you can smack down some PvE mobs really quickly. So it's up to you. If your group is a type of group that wants to clear rooms quickly and get to the center, then I would maybe take Divine Strike. But if you're just a PvP oriented group that's seeking out players, then perhaps Bless is the way to go. Now, the stats you want to boost here is the same as Solo Cleric, except for now we do want to boost Knowledge. And I actually would go for Knowledge first if you're trying to buy items that boost your stats, because Knowledge boosted enough could allow you to afford Resurrection without completely hamstringing your healing. So I would go for Knowledge first, and then of course after that, if you either don't care to afford Resurrection or just can't, then go for Will and go for Strength, because that will just make your spells more potent and will make your attacks stronger. Utility items are the same here. Campfires, and especially in a group setting, campfires are really good. Potions as well. Ale if you're taking Brewmaster. Now, with all that being said, those are the two builds. I will put both of those builds up on the screen now. Feel free to pause, take a look at them, adjust accordingly on your character. But yeah, that is the build guides. If you like the video, leave a like. Feel free to subscribe. I will be trying to put out videos like this for the other classes as much as I can before this testing period ends. And I'll see you guys in the next video.